Did you know that Hong Kong produces 6 million tons of trash each year? I certainly didn't. And while it doesn't surprise me that Hong Kongers produce a lot of waste, 6 million tons is a bit of a mind-boggling number. On top of that, only 3 landfills of the 16 functioning in the early 2000s are still in operation. And while Hong Kong used to send its trash to the mainland, China has rejected taking in any of its garbage, for the most part, since 2017. Hong Kong is running out of space for its trash, and fast. The alarming rate at which we are running out of space for our waste is not the only environmental crisis that the city has on its hands, though. From issues such as decarbonization to single-use plastic, even though Hong Kong doesn't suffer the worst of climate change's effects, we should all be worried about the long-term effects it will indubitably have on our lives. In this episode of Spyglass, I, your host Jasmine Lee, speak with Vincent Siu, founder of SUSTAINHK, to take a closer look at sustainability in Hong Kong. We discuss the background behind SUSTAINHK, the social and political lethargy that afflicts Hong Kong when it concerns climate change policies, and why, despite everything that 2020 has dealt humanity, Vince is optimistic for the future. Vince, you are the founder of SUSTAINHK, and for myself and for our listeners, could you let me know what SUSTAINHK is all about?
Sure. So SUSTAINHK is first and foremost a volunteer-led project. We are the environmental sustainability project, which belongs to the Hong Kong hub of the Global Shapers community. So I know that's a mouthful, but the Global Shapers community is actually an initiative of the World Economic Forum, which is a multilateral think tank focusing on public-private partnerships. If you guys have seen the World Economic Forum on social media channels, you might have seen a lot of their thought leadership work, some pretty good videos on different research that they do. So the Global Shapers is an initiative under that. And within the Hong Kong hub of the Global Shapers, we have a number of different social impact projects, and Sustain Hong Kong is one of them. So like I said, we focus on environmental sustainability, and the key thing that we do mostly is to facilitate different types of exchanges and dialogues and forums on climate science awareness, as well as best practice sharing between private and corporate sectors.
So is SUSTAINHK a new offshoot of the Global Shapers community?
So we started up around 2.5 years ago. So yeah, we've done a couple of events, a few programs in the ensuing 2.5 years.
So what was it that sort of brought about the founding of SUSTAINHK? Was there something that you saw in the community that just wasn't there yet, and you thought that starting SUSTAINHK would sort of bring a value that you weren't seeing available in that area of sustainability?
Actually, funny you asked that, because I think out of the founding team, I was the only person without sort of storied background in the subject. So another co-founder used to run a dress rental startup in Hong Kong. So she was doing a lot of circular economy, sort of just waste reduction work within the fashion industry. And another of our co-founders had a lot of friends who were working in the F&B industry and really at the time pushing the conversation forward in terms of what it means to be green within food and beverage. So I was just inspired by their passion and their expertise. And, I had a little bit of background in organizing different talks and events and curating speaker lists and content. So we just kind of came together. It started out just with a double sort of panel on F&B and fashion, of course. And that was really how it started. We never really had like a really grand, founding mission, but that first event, a lot of people showed up and there was a really good buzz that was generated. And so we decided to keep going. We've done different events focusing on F&B and on fashion. And we've also then come into contact with like other NGOs in Hong Kong, other think tanks in Hong Kong who are championing a lot about climate science. And so we've done a lot of those types of workshops and stuff as well. So for me, it's, I've been learning a lot along the way. And it seems like there's a much stronger community around this topic now.
So it's funny that you bring up that you don't have a formal history in, say, environmentalism or climate change. I did see that your background, or not necessarily your background, but you're involved in a couple other things. I've seen you talk a bit about gamification and your work with Press Start. You mentioned in one of these interviews that you did that you have also written about sports, and that's something that you also do. So it seems like you're somebody who has their interests, like a very wide breadth of interests. So what sort of sparked your interest in going forth with sustainability?
Yeah, you're correct. I do have a lot of interest in different areas. I think, so besides what you mentioned just now within gamification and obviously, the sports hobby and passion, my professional background is actually in innovation. So like consulting, doing a lot of that stuff. So when I started to really read up and sort of catch up to my co-founders on sustainability, I saw that type of experience could, have potentially bring a little bit of something to the table as well, because, in sustainability, you are applying new ways of thinking, you are applying new ways of design to very entrenched industries, to very entrenched business models, right? That's where the circular economy comes from. That's where all the different types of policies are coming in, because, by definition, the current state of like the linear economy is not sustainable going forward, right? So we really need to have a new way of approaching different issues, different problems, and looking at helping different stakeholders within the entire economy, within different industries. So there, it was really interesting to see a lot of parallels between what I used to do in, a corporate consulting environment and what I kind of also do now with a lot of sort of side social innovation consulting projects, which is to, apply the same type of thinking and the same type of problem solving to an issue that was new to me. And that was really quite exciting. So it seems like, I was also quite inspired just reading up and also taking like mini courses to learn a little bit more. And at the same time, Hong Kong doesn't have a strong sort of history of really talking about the climate as a core issue for Hong Kong to focus on. So I felt that, this hit all of the, things that were on my list. So that's why I dived into it.
There's definitely a lot that I want to unpack there in what you just said, but for our Spyglass listeners who aren't familiar with, say, the terms circular and linear economy, can you, give them a little explainer on that?
Sure. Just really quickly, again, I'm not an expert in this area, but the linear economy basically is life as we know it right now, right? So it's, there's three terms. There's take, make, and waste. So we take natural resources, we turn them into products, and then it goes to waste. So we're pretty familiar with that because that's what we've grown up with, and that's what largely the current model is about. So the circular economy is really about making that model a little bit more regenerative, right? So that's why we're hearing a lot about recycling. Basically, what that means is to take the waste that we generate and find ways to repurpose it into the materials that we can make new products with. So it creates thereby the circular fashion. And so that it just doesn't go into an incinerator, it doesn't go into a landfill, but it becomes then the next generation of raw materials. So we're making it, closing the loop sort of, and turning it full circle, so that there's no additional waste that is generated from what we do, our consumption and our behaviors. And also we then don't also need to take a lot of new resources from the environment in order for us to sustain our lifestyles.
Fantastic. Thank you for that quick definition. From what you said before, you did say that you just saw in Hong Kong that climate change just wasn't an issue being prioritized or put in focus. And so that sort of, lent to starting SUSTAINHK and putting your experience with innovation into the realm of sustainability and climate change. So why do you think, or what do you think is holding the government back, or just holding people back from sort of putting a societal or policy focus on these issues?
Sure. And that's an important question to ask first, right? Because we got to understand the context we're working with. I think Hong Kong is just a fascinating city itself. Just because I think we're all very spoiled in the sense that a lot of things work really efficiently for us. So we don't see the negative impacts of waste, for example. A lot of us don't live near like a landfill, and these things, like the fact that we're running out of landfill space in Hong Kong, that doesn't register a lot of our radars. And like to us, it really just, we don't encounter these things because the entire system underneath is quite efficient, and that all of that is taken out of our consciousness. At the same time, we're also kind of surrounded by nature a lot. I know we're a concrete jungle and all of that, but we can just spend like 15, 20 minutes on the public transport system, and we go to a country park, right? And so that to us probably seems like, hey, there's a pretty good balance of nature plus the built environment. And so the most that we can really feel is the air pollution, with the smog and things like that. And with a lot of cars and buses on the roads, we're just conditioned to sort of accept that, okay, that's just a byproduct of, Hong Kong as a bustling international city, and not really devote the headspace to thinking about what can we do to make that better. Because really, we're not directly impacted from the, hazardous climate events that are happening across the world. We're not impacted by droughts. We're not that impacted by sort of really dramatic weather changes. So we're really spoiled in that sense. And I think that has gotten both the government and also us as local Hong Kongers to be pretty complacent about what's actually happening to the environment. It's also not helpful that we always have more, quote unquote, more important things to worry about. We all know the social unrests that have been happening. And there's always something that is on the minds of everybody. And just sadly, because of all the reasons I listed above, climate just hasn't been one of them.
I suppose you could summarize what you said in a way is that we just don't feel that urgency. We just don't feel that urgency to act. We're not immediately impacted by the worst of climate change. And so we are thus spoiled in that sense and just don't feel that urgency to act now, and to change things now. And from my personal experience, I've always, leaned on the side of caring about, environmental issues and sustainability and caring about our planet. But I don't think it truly hit me the true detriments of, say, the linear economy until I lived in a place briefly where we don't just have that efficiency of our trash being used and then thrown away and then taking away from our sites, and we never see, hear, or smell it ever again. And I lived somewhere where that was not the case. Some mornings I would wake up to the smell of burning garbage. You don't forget a smell like that. I cannot explain. I cannot explain to people just there's nothing quite like it. Definitely something I cannot forget. There are beaches, or a beach in one specific example that I walked down once, and a very popular beach in that city, in that country actually, and you could just see it's a very popular beach, known to be very beautiful, lovely spot for tourists and for locals alike. And you could just see with the rise and fall of the waves, just plastic, garbage, plastic. And you could tell this beach probably maybe 20, 30 years ago, not even, was probably very, very beautiful. But it's just, experience, those two examples definitely hit me that things need to change. But I mean, not everyone. you can't just put everyone in Hong Kong in that kind of situation. That's just not going to happen. So what do you think, with your past experience and your work with SUSTAINHK, how do you think is the best way to get people to kind of just get out of this sort of complacency?
Yeah, I think, thanks for sharing those examples. It's always more real when you can see the impacts yourself, right? I always think the flip side of that is, you go to Japan and there are no trash bins, basically anywhere. So the only sorts of bins you come across in the public realm anyway are recycling bins. And so it ends up, for someone who, like, we live in Hong Kong, we have trash bins on basically every street corner, but no recycling bins. We're used to, picking something up from the convenience store and just, finish eating it or finish drinking from a bottle and just dumping it in the trash. Whereas in Japan, if you're, just finishing a snack, you have to hold on to it until you go home or go back to the hotel, because there's simply no trash bin and what you just consumed does not fall within like any category of recycling. So that, just like that type of, other extreme of recycling, is, also makes you feel like, okay, maybe sometimes we are having it a little bit too convenient here. Japan's sort of issue with plastic pollution and just the over plasticness of their economy is a totally other like topic, but, just wanted to use that as an example to illustrate. Now, so in terms of how we can, increase the awareness, is just expose different people to different sorts of practices. And but then it also takes, I guess, a little bit of work on our own part to be able to translate and bring those experiences and reflections back to here, and for that to be something that we care enough about to push the conversation forward, right? There's a lot of different focuses within the climate spectrum, within the sustainability spectrum. What we're not doing at Sustain Hong Kong is we're not focusing on the consumer lifestyle aspect, just because as a volunteer-led project, it's pretty hard to be able to devote the amount of resources to create the content that a lot of good startups are doing. I want to shout out like Green Monday, what they're doing to promote a green and healthy eating lifestyle and consumption lifestyle. That's something that, a company that is devoted to this can do. That is something that we're not capable of doing at this stage. So what we're focusing on really is to drum up the awareness. We want to bring, in the climate science aspect, we want to bring scientists and experts to really talk about actually what is happening with the climate. Just now, earlier, we were talking about how Hong Kong is not really impacted by the most adverse effects of climate change. And so it takes a different type of articulation for us to feel it, because we're not facing like, sea level rise. We're not facing a lot of those things. But we need to understand the science behind all of this, all of the phenomena behind melting of glaciers, which obviously we don't have. So all of those, just to put into context that, hey, this is actually a real problem that we don't feel, but if we don't do something about it, then there has, we will ultimately down the line sort of, feel the impacts from it as well. So, I guess we are focusing more on like the bigger picture of things. What can companies, what can organizations do? What can policymakers do in terms of putting together like regulations on, what types of construction there is happening in Hong Kong, or what the waste system should look like in Hong Kong, and all of those things, which are not immediately achievable just by one person. And I think there is that friction between us as individuals understanding there's something to be done, and then how do we cross that bridge and push the people who are decision makers to be able to get those regulations in place. And so that difficulty, that challenge is probably what puts a lot of us off. So it's a continued battle, and I would guess that's probably why a lot of us are pretty lethargic about it.
Could you maybe elaborate a bit more on the major obstacles that have faced you with your work when tackling the bigger picture climate issues with companies and corporations and even the government in Hong Kong?
Sure. For companies and corporations, I think it's, what we can expect. A lot of companies and organizations still see sustainability or going green as a cost. So that is something that they have to take out of the balance sheet, right? And so by definition, if that's something that they have to take out of the balance sheet, especially in a challenging economic environment, that is not one of their priorities. Is to spend more money. So the challenge there is to really reframe the sustainability conversation as something that is a longer term concern. And the entire sort of discourse around, the circular economy and all of those things is to design and conceptualize like a new type of business model that is around minimizing waste. Therefore, we don't have to procure a lot of raw materials. It's really changing the entire supply chain, which is again something that not every company is capable of doing. Because if you're a small manufacturer, you don't really have oversight over what your suppliers are doing. Only the biggest companies in the world do have that sort of governance over the entire supply chain. So that is definitely one of the main challenges. On the government side, so we haven't really dealt directly with the government, but we've worked with a lot of like NGOs and think tanks. And I guess the overall sentiment is just how do we, get the message across that this is a serious issue that has to be dealt with. And I think for a city that has always prided itself on being so economically free, I would not be surprised to learn that there is a lot of friction and a lot of hesitation in implementing regulations and guidelines that might, in their minds, restrict the economic activity, or it might just, make people scared. Okay, what other sorts of disclosures, what other sorts of practices would I have to implement in my business to be able to meet your guidelines, and therefore somehow making Hong Kong a less financially attractive place. So I think there are a lot of like hesitations over these things because the discourse has always been about we got to stop climate change, and everything related to that is we got to change our lifestyles and change the entire way of how everything works to deliver something that will be not the same as what we're doing right now. So there's a lot of just obstacles from their point of view, which I totally empathize with. And that is the major challenge that we have to deal with as well.
So you've identified these challenges to me. Would you say that you and your team have been able to come up with any, maybe not even full solutions, because full solutions at this point with something like climate change is easier said than done. But would you say there have been any, say, effective practices or say something in your toolbox that's really helped out with the work that you guys do when it comes to facing these challenges?
Yeah, within the realm of what we are up to, given that again we're a volunteer-led platform, I think the events that we've done, the dialogues we've hosted, have actually been quite useful to our participants and our speakers as well, from the feedback that we're getting, because we tend to curate talks on super specific things, right? Well, we had a talk last year which was on waste, like technology within the waste space for food and beverage companies. So then it was really like getting together a group of F&B professionals, hospitality professionals around the table and hearing from like startups who are pioneering tech that tracks waste that comes from central kitchens and how you can optimize your kitchen operations. And also then how do you get rid of, like, say, plastic bottles on an organizational level by implementing like smart water fountains and things like that. So we really dive into like the executional parts, and we tend to also really prompt and probe our speakers into sharing like detailed examples of how they got an idea executed, how they got a policy pushed through, or also how they dealt with failure. And so, we don't want to stay at the surface level, where everybody's talking about the same things. That's where greenwashing sort of, is rampant. But we want to get down into, into the depths. And so other people in the audience who have the ambition to do similar things or to learn about like other new ideas so they can collaborate, have that context, and have the level of information that they need in order to have that next level conversation, right? So there's been a lot of really cool exchanges and collaborations that have resulted from some of the events that we've done, which we're very proud about. And going forward, we're experimenting with doing more sort of collaborative and co-creative workshops. So not just exchanges, but how can we work together to, like you said, come up with like solutions and ideas. But the most important part is that we will need people who are decision makers and policymakers to be present in those sort of forums and workshops as well, just so we have that endorsement, I guess, or that visibility through all stages of the process.
So do you have any stories, or do you have a story, an example that comes to mind that stands out to you of, say, a startup that was able to push through these policies, overcome failures that you would like to share?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a company in Hong Kong called Ant Energy, and I've known their founding team for quite a while, and they've pivoted their business strategy quite a few times just because of the it's. Again, ultimately, it's a challenging space to work in terms of sustainability as a business focus, right, in Hong Kong. Right now, they are their product is as sort of like a battery, but specifically for construction sites in Hong Kong. And they're starting to work with a lot of major developers. And this is as an alternative to like the really loud and the really smoky like diesel generators on site, which are heavily polluting. And basically there's this a battery storage alternative. And so that instantly decreases the sort of the pollution output on construction sites. And that's really just a drop in the ocean in terms of all the things that can be changed within the construction industry, because that's single-handedly the industry that has the highest carbon footprint globally. So there's a lot of stuff that can be done there. And we're also good friends with a think tank in Hong Kong called Civic Exchange. And they have an offshoot that focuses on sort of carbon emissions in Hong Kong called Hong Kong 2050 is Now. And they've just put out a really comprehensive report titled Pathways to Net Zero Carbon Emissions by 2050. And they have a lot of really good policy recommendations and proposals inside. And mobility, construction are key pillars inside. So there are a lot of things that are happening, a lot of good success stories, a lot of really nice coalitions that are being formed right now. I guess the epilogue to what we were talking about just now is actually now that businesses are discovering that COVID has forced them to think about wider social impacts. Then they are also starting to wrap in sustainability as part of the conversation too. So there's a lot of encouraging signs and some success stories as well. So I guess the work going forward is really to champion those success stories and really get more people to know about them, so they can start working together. I would love to see more construction companies work with Ant. I would love to see, I know they're expanding to Singapore as well. So there is a lot of really encouraging developments. So, I'm slightly optimistic.
Well, it's great to hear that somebody's optimistic, because I know that in the world of 2020, it is often hard to be. So that's nice to hear that from you, Vince. I just have a couple final questions for you. So earlier you did mention to me that SUSTAINHK, your value is to be more of a curator of topics and experts on issues that we should care more about. My couple questions for you on that is, what do you think, aside from everything we've talked about, what are specific issues that Hong Kongers should care more about? Actually, I'll just leave you with that question first.
Sure. I think what we found is that our events on F&B and fashion are the best attended ones, and from the public. So people who are not professionals within these industries. And I think, just kind of reflecting on that, what we've realized is that's probably because just like food and fashion are such core tenets to Hong Kong society in general. And so these topics are interestingly accessible to a lot of people. Everybody, even if you have not worked within the F&B industry, have been like a consumer or a patron of a restaurant, right, at some point. And so you sort of are familiar with how the industry functions, at least on the surface level. And so if there's an event talking about packaging and waste, it immediately becomes real. Because let's face it, especially now, there's so much like food that is being delivered. And so anybody who does not even have a second of like remorse over, I have like a group of friends over and we're just getting like 20 plastic boxes delivered in a plastic bag by someone riding on a scooter. Like anybody who does not have a pang of remorse over that, just for a second, has really not devoted like that consciousness to this topic. But I think a lot of us do realize that this is not sustainable. So the more that we can talk about this as not, hey, we should cut out delivery entirely, but how can we make that at least a little bit more sustainable, right? So initiatives like restaurants saying, hey, you can bring your own container in to get takeout and you would get like a discount on that. That's great. These are areas where we need policymakers, where we need the government to help push. We can see a lot of really good examples outside of Hong Kong where the governments are subsidizing a lot of these efforts just so there is a behavior that is built. I remember at the beginning when Tesla first came to Hong Kong that the government had a waiver for partially some of the taxes on buying a car. And that was back then when the government wanted to encourage, hey, if you're going to buy a car, we're going to encourage you to buy electric. So things like this that are, that help us as consumers make the leap. Imagine if us bringing in containers into a restaurant to get takeout, instead of getting $5 off, we get like 10% off or 20% off. And actually half of that is subsidized by the government. So if there's a system like that in place, I can imagine, Hong Kongers are so conscious about cost that a lot of us would just jump on that immediately.
It's actually funny that you mentioned like bringing your own container.
Yeah.
And I know that Hong Kongers can do it because not that long ago, the film In the Mood for Love by Wong Kar-wai, it highlights, it's just like a facet of the movie that you could not even notice, but there's these scenes where the protagonists of the film, they're going to the wonton noodle shop with the thermos because they pick it up in their thermos and then they go home. And that's how it was done. I believe this was like in the 60s.
Sure.
So it's already there. It's just that within the last, many decades, it's just so easy to forget that we're able to do that and to do like small things that make a big difference.
And I think the fact that right now the onus is entirely on us as the consumers to want to do it, and on the restaurants to absorb the cost of, if you give a $5 discount for someone to not bring to not use like a takeaway cup, I can guarantee you that paper cup does not cost $5, right? And so that cost differential, if you multiply that, the business has to absorb that. And so these are areas where, we do need support from policymakers to make that cost differential just a little bit more comfortable for everybody to grapple with, so that it becomes a habit on both sides. And then you sort of gradually ease it out because, people are already starting to get used to it. So these are all areas that, we could do with a little push.
Those are all fantastic points. We've reached time and I don't want to keep you any longer just because I know that we've all got busy days ahead of us. Thank you so much for your time, Vince. Where can our listeners find you if they want to know what you're up to?
Yeah, thanks for having me. We're pretty informal. We're just on Facebook and Instagram. So if you search SUSTAINHK in all caps, and our logo is a leaf. On Instagram, we're spelled Sustain Hong Kong in full. And we're right now, finishing up the TEDx Civic Exchange countdown series of events. So we have a couple of those coming up, and we're planning for more stuff to come.
If I may just squeeze in one more question, because I am curious. I know that SUSTAINHK right now is a volunteer-led organization or project, a volunteer-led project. Are there any hopes or plans for the future that it might grow into something more of like a consultancy or something of the sort?
We haven't actually actively talked about it yet, because, then it becomes something a lot grander in scale, a lot more ambitious, right? And the instant where, there are jobs on the line to fund something like a consultancy, then it becomes, a whole other discussion. There are a lot of good consultancies right now, just in Hong Kong and also within the region. So we are in touch with a lot of them. For now, I think we're going to stay as a volunteer-led project, and we can see how much of the sort of grassroots community around all the topics that we discussed can grow. If anything, I would love for us to, grow into more of an NGO status. Then we can really work with different organizations and partner with them, but also be able to, work with the government and take government funding and really push forward on policies and continue advocating for all of those things.
That is all for this episode of Spyglass. If you'd like to support our work, please share this podcast. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please do leave us a review. You can also find us on our social media. We also have a free newsletter you can sign up for on Substack, where you can also leave comments and join in on our discussion threads. It's all over there. All the links you need are provided in the show notes. If you really like what we do, you can also support us with the power of your dollar on Patreon or at the other links, which, as I said, all in the show notes. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll be back next month to take a closer look at another topic in Hong Kong.